On April 1, 2026, NASA launched 4 astronauts toward the moon on the Artemis 2 mission, the first crewed flight beyond low Earth orbit in over 50 years. Within days, millions of people on social media were claiming the entire thing was staged, filmed on green screens, and powered by CGI. So the green screen accusations, the AI-generated leak footage, the broadcast glitches, and the flat Earth influencers calling it all theater. We're going to go through every single one of them and examine what actually happened on and around this mission. Let's start with the video that set the internet on fire. NASA's historic lunar flyby in April 2026 sent astronauts farther from Earth than any human before, and within the first week, a clip recorded off a television screen started going viral across every major platform. It featured a smartphone recording of a television broadcast of an interview with the Artemis 2 crew as they floated in microgravity. During the footage, a woman can be heard asking off camera, "What's up with the lettering behind this ball?" as the camera zooms in on captions that appear superimposed on parts of the mission's official moon mascot. That was all it took. The words on screen seemed to bleed through a floating plush toy, and people jumped immediately to one conclusion: green screen. The video of the glitch racked up over 1.5 million views as it spread in similar social media posts. Now, let's be clear about what was in that footage. The toy seen in the video is the Artemis 2 official mascot, called Rise. The smiley-faced plushie, designed by a child, serves as the mission's zero-gravity indicator and is inspired by the iconic Earthrise moment seen on a previous lunar mission. Zero-gravity indicators have been a tradition in spaceflight for decades. You tether a small object in the cabin, and when it starts floating, the crew knows they've reached microgravity. It's a simple, practical tool. But in the clip going viral, text from a news chyron appeared to cut through the body of this floating mascot. If the mascot were a real physical object, the argument went text could not pass through it. Therefore, the mascot, and by extension the entire broadcast, was fake. The crew was dangling from wires in front of a chroma key wall in a studio somewhere. A digital forensics expert told AFP the anomaly was a failed text overlay by the news station. That syndicated the official feed, which showed the plush toy remained solid throughout. Professor Hani Farid from the University of California, Berkeley, one of the world's leading experts in digital image forensics, examined the footage. Farid told AFP that the filmed footage merely captured a failed text overlay on the part of the broadcaster. He explained, "Because we only see the text on the blue part of the spinning object, I hypothesized that the broadcaster didn't lay down a blue banner on which the text should have been overlaid." In other words, the news station broadcasting NASA's feed placed a text graphic on screen, without a solid background banner behind it. The broadcaster's system interpreted the blue portions of the mascot as a blue background, which is exactly how chroma key software works. It removes blue or green pixels. But this was the broadcaster's overlay system, not NASA's camera system. The falsely shared video corresponds to the broadcast's 436 mark, but does not show any text bleeding through the floating object. The same footage was also uploaded on the verified Video from Space YouTube channel, without any such glitch. So the original NASA feed had no anomaly. The original YouTube upload had no anomaly. The glitch only appeared on one specific syndicated television broadcast, because one specific broadcaster's graphics software mishandled a text overlay. A person then recorded that television with their phone and posted it online. And that third-generation copy of the footage became the primary evidence for the biggest conspiracy theory of 2026. But this video was just the tip of the iceberg, because what came next wasn't just misinterpretation, it was fabrication. The broadcast glitch was, in many ways, an honest misunderstanding, amplified by the speed of social media. What followed was something far more deliberate, far more sophisticated, and far more dangerous. For many decades, conspiracy theorists have attempted to argue that NASA's missions to the lunar surface were somehow faked, and the space agency's latest trip around the moon and back is no different. Except this time, the widespread proliferation of AI slop is supercharging the trend, with denialists pointing to faked AI-generated footage as proof of their claims, with no apparent sense of irony. Think about that for a second. People who insist NASA uses CGI to fabricate space missions are now using AI-generated imagery, which is functionally CGI, to prove their point. One particularly sticky video shows the crew of 4 astronauts hanging by harnesses in front of a large green screen. As France 24 points out, it doesn't take much analysis to conclude that it's AI slop, from glitching overlaid text that interferes with the floating Artemis mascot in the shot, to missing limbs and the wrong number of fingers on some of their hands. Missing limbs and wrong finger counts. The hallmark tells of AI-generated content, and yet this footage racked up views in the millions. A simple search for the term Artemis leaks on Elon Musk's X, formerly Twitter, reveals how widespread the trend is, from generated footage of a fake moon being hung in front of a green screen, to brain rot claims that NASA had used AI in CGI and green screens. The mechanics of the disinformation pipeline here are worth understanding, further sowing online confusion were claims that the entire Artemis 2 mission was a hoax, powered by artificial intelligence tools. The assertion underscores how the rise of cheap and widely available AI tools has given misinformation peddlers a handy incentive to cast doubt on authentic content, a tactic researchers have dubbed as the liar's dividend. The liar's dividend is the concept that the mere existence of deepfakes and AI-generated media gives bad actors a built-in excuse to dismiss anything real as fake. It doesn't matter how many cameras NASA puts on the spacecraft. It doesn't matter how many independent tracking stations around the world confirm the trajectory. Once the public knows AI can fabricate video, any video can be called artificial. The liar's dividend allows peddlers to dismiss authentic footage as AI-generated. Technical glitches like news station overlay errors are frequently misrepresented as proof of a scripted production, further eroding digital trust across social media platforms. And this erosion of trust was not happening on the margins. Artemis' second mission draws conspiracy theories when misinformation influencers use AI-manipulated images and technical anomalies to claim the flight was staged. These narratives often circulate on platforms like X and TikTok, eroding public trust in NASA's scientific achievements. There was also a conspiracy claim about a mysterious object on the lunar surface, supposedly spotted in Artemis footage. Unfounded claims that the Artemis 2 mission detected a mysterious moving object on the moon's surface also racked up millions of views across platforms. That claim too was baseless, but it was engineered for engagement. Mysterious objects, secret discoveries, government cover-ups. These claims are designed to generate clicks, and they work. Once confined to the internet's fringes, conspiracy theories have moved squarely into the mainstream, amid growing mistrust of public institutions and traditional media. Scientific achievements such as the lunar mission present very easy content for conspiracy influencers, said disinformation researcher Mike Rothschild. There are some people whose reflexive reaction to any kind of major event is to claim it's fake and staged, no matter what it is, Rothschild told AFP. The irony at the center of all of this is almost poetic. The people claiming NASA faked the mission are the ones actually producing fake footage. Why anybody who actually believed NASA had faked its lunar flyby would choose to AI-generate footage as counter-evidence is a question worth asking. But AI slop and broadcast glitches were only part of the story. The conspiracy movement also had its own celebrity spokespeople, and they had been preparing their narrative long before the rocket left the ground. A more organized group was running a parallel campaign. These weren't random trolls. They were the established voices of the Flat Earth movement, and they treated Artemis 2 as their moment to shine. The loudest dismissal comes from Mark Sargent, one of the most recognizable figures in the modern Flat Earth movement, and a central character in Netflix's 2018 documentary Behind the Curve. Speaking to the Daily Star, Sargent said Artemis II is absolutely fake, 100%, repeating his claim that NASA's Artemis program has been in theaters since minute one. He insisted the mission was debunked months and months before it even launched by himself and other flat earthers, although no verifiable technical evidence is offered to support that assertion. He did not explain what debunked means in this context. No technical papers were produced. No measurements were taken. No counter data was offered. The claim stood entirely on the insistence that it was true. In his telling, NASA's Artemis thief footage is built using the same camera techniques, same green screen, blue screen stuff, chroma key. Sargent's argument was essentially that because he believes previous missions were faked using chroma key compositing, this mission must also be faked using chroma key compositing. Sargent also folded Artemis II into a broader political narrative. He claimed its timing is tied to America 250, the 250th anniversary of the 1776 Declaration of Independence, describing the program as an attempt at trying to establish a newfound American dominance. That is an interpretation rather than a documented NASA policy, and NASA has not presented Artemis II as a geopolitical show of strength in those terms. Then came the Van Allen belt argument, a favorite among moon landing deniers for decades. He also revisited older claims about the Van Allen radiation belts, regions of charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field. In a 2014 NASA video about early Orion test flights, engineer Kelly Smith said the agency had to solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. Conspiracy theorists routinely strip the line of its technical context and present it as an admission that Apollo never happened. That 2014 quote has been recycled relentlessly for over a decade. In its original context, Kelly Smith was explaining the engineering challenges NASA faced in designing radiation shielding for the Orion capsule, the same capsule that just carried 4 astronauts around the moon and back. The Van Allen belts are real. They contain real radiation. NASA did have to solve the problem, and they did solve the problem. That's what engineers do. But the conspiracy ecosystem doesn't deal in nuance. Confusion over how the far side of the moon could have some light shining on it in the photos taken by the Artemis II crew became another conspiracy talking point. The implication here, of course, is that there's something fishy going on. The far side of the moon receives approximately the same amount of sunlight as the near side. It is called the far side, not the dark side, a distinction that would be clear to anyone who spent more than 30 seconds looking it up. Surveys show persistent conspiracy beliefs in the US, with about 10% doubting moon landings and similar numbers embracing flat Earth and microchip myths. That 10% has remained remarkably consistent over time. But what has changed is their megaphone. Digital trust is eroding as misinformation influencers claim the lunar flyby was faked using advanced tools. Experts warn that reduced content moderation has turned several tech platforms into hotbeds for false narratives. None of the specific staging claims about Artemis II have been independently verified, and there is no publicly available evidence that the mission is fabricated, so all such allegations remain unproven and should be treated with caution. They were about identity, community, and the satisfying feeling of believing you know something the rest of the world does not. But while conspiracy influencers were arguing about green screens and flat planes, NASA had a real and very serious problem on its hands. One that had nothing to do with hoaxes and everything to do with physics. If there was a genuine story about things going wrong with Artemis, something based in engineering reality rather than internet fantasy, it was the heat shield. Questions about the Orion space capsule's 16.5-foot wide heat shield arose during an unpiloted mission, Artemis I, in 2022, when engineers observed that its ablative outer material, which is meant to burn up and erode, was not able to relieve pressure inside the capsule and carry heat away from it as expected. The pressure buildup contributed to cracking in the heat shield's outer layer, with portions of the charred material breaking away in several locations. This was not a conspiracy theory. This was a documented engineering failure, observed, photographed, and reported by NASA itself. NASA's Office of Inspector General wrote that NASA had identified more than 100 locations where ablative thermal protective material from Orion's heat shield wore away differently than expected during re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. More than 100 locations on the one component of the spacecraft that has no backup. NASA builds redundancy into everything. There's almost always a backup system or a secondary option in case something goes wrong. But there's no redundancy for the heat shield, it simply has to work. The heat shield material is called AVCoat, a silica fiber-based ablative coating, originally developed for the Apollo program. When Orion hits the atmosphere, the AVCoat transforms into 3 distinct zones. The surface turns into a black, carbon-rich crust. This char layer can reach temperatures up to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit without melting, by re-radiating most of the heat into space. Beneath the char layer, the heat causes the epoxy resin to chemically decompose, an endothermic reaction called pyrolysis. This creates gases that filter out through the porous char layer, creating a cooler boundary layer between the heat shield and the 5,000-degree plasma surrounding the craft. Beautiful engineering. But during Artemis I, it didn't work as planned. For the whole process to work, the gases produced during pyrolysis need to escape smoothly. In Artemis I, the AVCoat lacked permeability in some areas. This caused the outer char layer to harden during the skip re-entry. Then the gases created during the pyrolysis could not escape and pressure built up, causing spallation micro-explosions that popped off chunks. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The heat shield for the Artemis II flight, identical to the one used with Artemis, was already installed. Replacing it with a new design would have delayed the mission by 18 months or more. So NASA had a decision to make: delay by a year and a half and install a new redesigned heat shield, or fly with the existing one and change the flight plan instead. They chose door number 2. Rather than redo the heat shield, NASA came up with a modified path for the capsule's re-entry to minimize risk to the astronauts. Ordinarily, before it begins its final descent, the Orion spacecraft is meant to dip into the atmosphere, then pop up again, like a stone skipping on the water's surface, to reduce heat stress and G-force on the capsule. But this time the skip would be brief and the capsule would descend faster and at a steeper angle to minimize how long it is exposed to the most extreme temperatures. One former NASA astronaut, Charles Camarda, estimated a 1 in 20 chance of disaster, or 95% success rate. Camarda was not some fringe figure. He was a former shuttle astronaut, an engineer who specialized in thermal protection systems. He argues engineers do not fully understand the root cause of the Artemis I heat shield damage and cannot accurately predict how the Artemis II heat shield will perform. In a letter to the NASA administrator, Camarda wrote that history shows accidents occur when organizations convince themselves they understand problems they do not. This is the kind of insider criticism that deserves attention, not because it means the mission was faked, but because it highlights the genuine tensions within NASA about risk acceptance. This was the real controversy, not green screens, not AI footage, not flat Earth arguments. The actual debate was between engineers inside NASA who disagreed about whether it was safe to fly. And on April 11, 2026, the heat shield held. The crew splashed down safely. The Artemis Tucson crew has returned to the agency's Johnson Space Center in Houston. Following their historic lunar flyby mission, the first crewed test flight of NASA's Artemis program lifted off from Launch Pad 39B on April 1st, carrying the first astronauts to travel to the moon in more than half a century. During their nearly 10-day mission, the crew completed a record-setting lunar flyby, taking them 252,756 miles at their farthest distance from Earth. But the heat shield conversation was far from over, because it had implications for every future Artemis mission, and the broader program itself was in turbulent waters. So did they fake everything? Let's look at where things actually stand. The Artemis program is a moon exploration program led by the United States National Aeronautics and Space Administration, aimed at returning humans to the moon for the first time since Apollo 17 in 1972. It was formally established via Space Policy Directive 1 in 2017. The original goal was to land astronauts on the moon by 2024 and establish a sustainable presence by 2028. The program is roughly 8 years behind its original targets, with costs climbing into the tens of billions beyond initial projections. The program has already cost taxpayers roughly $100 billion. Each SLS rocket costs USD $2 billion to launch. This extraordinary cost has already raised questions in Congress about long-term sustainability. The second Trump administration released its fiscal year 2026 budget proposal, which proposed canceling the SLS and Orion spacecraft after Artemis III, due to the former's cost of $4 billion per launch. Here's the thing that's more interesting than any conspiracy theory. The real story of Artemis is one of staggering ambition, smashing headfirst into political cycles, budget constraints, and engineering reality. Congressional requests amounting to pork barrel projects have contributed to money misspent, and a mission design that incorporates obsolescence. The mission has been subjected to political interference from 4 different administrations. Over more than 50 years, each new presidential administration has reassessed the place of spaceflight among its priorities, either encouraging or curtailing NASA's efforts to return humans to the lunar surface. Each crewed flight requires the alignment of technical expertise, political will, and financial support over years, if not decades. The Artemis II crew themselves were making history in ways that had nothing to do with controversy. Victor Glover became the first person of color, Christina Koch the first woman, Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen the first non-US citizen, and Commander Reed Wiseman the oldest person to travel beyond low Earth orbit and around the moon. During their lunar flyby, the crew set the record for human distance from Earth, 252,756 miles, breaking Apollo 13's record of 248,655 miles. First came the soul-stirring Hello World photograph, the first complete view of the Earth captured by astronauts in 54 years. Next, astonishing images of the dark side of the moon as seen for the first time by human eyes. Then an emotional video shared around the world, in which the space crew names a newly discovered moon crater in honor of their mission commander's late wife. It's been 8 days since NASA's Artemis II team departed the Earth, and their mission has warmed hearts and staggered imaginations worldwide. Meanwhile, the future of the program hangs in a precarious balance. In late February 2026, NASA expedited Artemis III to 2027, but it would no longer land on the moon. Instead, it would conduct rendezvous and docking tests in low Earth orbit, with one or both commercially developed lunar landers, SpaceX's Starship HLS and Blue Origin's Blue Moon, and to test the new Axiom spacesuit. The first actual lunar landing has been pushed to Artemis IV in 2028. A report from NASA's Office of Inspector General said SpaceX's Starship lander is behind schedule by at least 2 years, with additional delays expected. And as for the political environment, the president's budget request includes a proposal to cut NASA's science budget by nearly 50%. Overall, the budget proposal would cut the agency's top line by $5.6 billion, or 23%. Rep. George Whitesides, a California Democrat and former NASA Chief of Staff, said the mission's success has been bittersweet against the backdrop of federal disinvestment in research. "I think in any normal time this would be the crowning achievement of the last few decades," he said. As it is, Artemis becomes sort of an echo of what America could still be, but is not today, because of the attacks on science. So here's the verdict: nobody faked anything. Artemis II launched on April 1, 2026 from Kennedy Space Center. It was tracked by independent observers, amateur radio operators, and space agencies around the world. Physicist David Robert Grimes estimated the time that it would take for a conspiracy to be exposed, based on the number of people involved. His calculations used data from the PRISM surveillance program, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, and the FBI forensic scandal. Grimes estimated that a moon landing hoax would require the involvement of 411,000 people and would be exposed within 3.68 years. The Artemis program involves hundreds of thousands of engineers, contractors, and government employees across multiple countries. The Canadian Space Agency provided one of the crew members. The European Space Agency built the Orion service module. You would need every single one of those people, across all those nations, all those agencies, to maintain perfect silence. Forever. What was real was a $100 billion program plagued by cost overruns, a heat shield that made seasoned astronauts nervous, a political establishment that cannot decide whether it wants to fund its own space agency, and a crew of 4 human beings who sat on top of a 322-foot-tall rocket and flew farther from home than anyone in human history, then came back alive to tell us about it. The fake footage was made by people on the internet. The real mission was made by engineers who spent decades working toward 10 days in space. Deciding which one to believe is not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of whether you trust the people who showed their work or the ones who used AI to generate theirs.